day is entitled Understanding Special Education Basics in Illinois, and our presenter today is Carrie Potter. Thank you, Carrie.
I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us. Today we're going to talk about special education basics. I'm a parent information specialist, sorry, almost gave the wrong title. I'm an information specialist here at Family Matters, and I am also the parent of a child who received services from birth throughout her entire school career. She's now 20 years old, so I've experienced the entire school and special education process from the time she entered school until the time she graduated, and now looking more at the adult side of things. Let me get my PowerPoint to move forward. I wanted to share with you our information, and I did want to say Family Matters, none of our staff are legal professionals. We are not a legal services agency, so we can't provide any, legal advice, and none of the information in this webinar should be taken as legal advice. If you do want to contact us, I've listed our phone, fax, email, website, Facebook, all of that information is in your PowerPoint on your slides, so you can feel free to reach out to us anytime with any questions you may have after today's webinar or anytime in the future. I do want to say, special education is a process that can sometimes be overwhelming, and I do think one of the most important things is knowing who you can go to ask questions and where you can find accurate information. You should be able to turn to your parent center if you have questions at any point in time throughout your child or a student's special education process. And today, I just wanted to put an agenda of the things we would cover. So this kind of gives you an idea of the different things that we'll cover as far as special education in today's webinar. So special education, like I said, I think it can be an overwhelming process sometimes. I think you're learning a new language as a parent or professional. When you first enter the world of special education, you may not know what all the terms mean, things like that. So again, I think it's always important to feel comfortable asking questions. If you don't know what something means, like I try to tell families all the time that I work with, sometimes I use acronyms because I'm so used to the acronyms, because I have had a child receive special education services for years, and then I've worked here for a long time. So sometimes I don't think, and I may say something like FAPE. Well, it's okay to say, hey, what does FAPE mean? Help me understand what you're talking about, because I don't know what the acronym means. So don't be afraid to ask questions. So I wanted to go over a little bit about what special education is. So special education means specially designed instruction at no cost to parents. According to regulations, a child is entitled to FAPE, which is a free appropriate public education. So there would be no fee for special education services or specially designed instruction. And then that specially designed instruction is going to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. And I did cite the regulation where you can find that. So if you did want to look that up, you could type in the 34 CFR 300.39 to get that definition that is listed in the federal regulations as far as the meaning of special education. And so one thing that I've always looked at as a parent and just as a professional too is everyone that you meet in life, we all have different abilities and needs. We all learn differently. So just like anybody you meet is going to learn a little differently than you, all students are going to possess differences, learn differently, demonstrate different abilities. And all of these factors contribute to each individual person's uniqueness. And special education is more about a person's ability than their disability, and you want to look at what their strengths are over deficits. Of course, you have to address those, how their disability impacts them, and you have to address their deficits, but you also want to, focus on their strengths and the amazing abilities each person has. So what your child can do is far more important than any perceived or actual limitations he or she may be experiencing. And because a parent's going to know their child really well, better than almost anybody. So as a parent, you have a lot of information to share, and a parent's involvement is important in the educational process. I mean, it's very critical that parents be involved because you have a lot of information you can share with the school side of the IEP team. But then I think professionals also are very important in the process because, you know, when my daughter was in school, I would think, I don't see her at school all day. So, you know, I can share what I see at home and in the community and what she tells me about school, but the professionals also have a lot of information, valuable information to share with parents and the IEP team. And special education really refers to a range of services that are going to help students with disabilities to learn. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So every IEP shouldn't be cookie cutter and all look the same. IEPs should be written to meet the provide appropriate services and to meet the needs of that individual student. So, you know, when you're writing an IEP, no two IEPs should look the same. And you know, when I say IEP, that is an individualized education program, and kids who qualify or students who qualify for special education are going to have an IEP in place. One resource that I refer to often is the Educational Rights and Responsibilities Parent Guide from the State Board of Education that was updated in August of 2020. So I've provided a link of where you can find that on the state board's website. You can also contact our office if you want a copy of that. We'd be happy to get you one and mail that out to you. But I just wanted to share that. That's broken down into chapters and has a lot of great information. So I thought it would be good to start with talking about Child Find. So Child Find is an ongoing process through which all children from birth through the age of 21, and when we say through the age of 21, we mean through the day before the student's 22nd birthday. It's you're trying to find children in that age range who may need special education services or find children who may be eligible for early intervention, and you want to make sure they're identified, located, and evaluated. So each school district is responsible for actively locating, identifying, and evaluating all children who live within the district boundaries who may qualify to receive special education and or related services. So all school districts have to have written procedures for Child Find activities for all school children, including those attending private schools, charter schools, and any religious affiliated schools. And then, you know, their procedures should describe, you know, any annual screening they'll do, ongoing review of all children in general education classes, ongoing coordination they have with early intervention programs like Child and Family Connection offices, Head Starts, local preschools, and any daycare facilities in their area. And also coordination and consultation with non-public schools located within the district, and then referral of children who might require evaluation from special education from parents, school staff, and representatives from community agencies. So that kind of gives you an idea of what Child Find is. Just basically a district has that responsibility to try to identify, locate, and evaluate anyone who may potentially be eligible for services. One thing that's important, I think, to understand is there is a difference between screening and evaluation. So a screening is the process of reviewing all children in a given group with a set of criteria for the purpose of identifying certain individuals who may need an evaluation and who may be in need of special education services. So one purpose of screening is to locate children between the ages of birth through 21 who may benefit from special education services to maintain satisfactory educational performance. So no child can be determined eligible to receive early intervention or special education services based only on the results of a screening procedure. So like we said, screening is different than evaluation. Screening generally means, reviewing all children in a given group. So maybe all kindergartners, all students who are new to the school district, all 3-year-old children in the community, etc. So it's not specific to an individual child, whereas an evaluation would be more specific to an individual child. So when children are referred to for an evaluation, maybe a screening would find some concerns, and then that child could be referred to an evaluation, and then an evaluation could be completed to determine eligibility for that specific child. An evaluation is going to be done to determine if that child has a disability and if they require special education services. And then I wanted to talk about referral, the referral process, referrals and evaluations. So a referral in the context of special education services is a process asking the school district to evaluate a student to decide if that student qualifies to receive special education services. So a referral can be made by the school district through like a teacher or other professional that works with a child who's involved with their education. A referral can be made by a parent, a guardian, a state agency, or any type of community service agency, or maybe even the student. So, when we talk about community agencies, I've seen where doctors' offices may have concerns and talk to the parent and put something in writing saying, hey, I think the student needs to be evaluated to determine eligibility for an IEP or special education services. So, many different people can make a referral. And then, one thing that we've told parents often through the years is, put that request in writing. If it's the parent making that request, put your request in writing to the school requesting that evaluation. Sometimes if it's not in writing, it's like it not always, but it can be like it was never said. So, if you do put it in writing, you have that paper trail. And it's important to remember that not all referrals result in an evaluation being conducted. So, when you make that referral, the school district would review that and determine whether they think an evaluation is warranted or not. And we'll get further into what happens if a district doesn't feel an evaluation is warranted. So once a referral is made, the school district has 14 school days after receiving the written request. And within that 14 school days, the district will decide whether to evaluate the child or not. If the district does determine an evaluation is warranted, then the district must provide the parents with the paperwork to provide formal written consent. So there is a 60 school day timeline for evaluation. That timeline starts from the date that the parent signs informed written consent. If the district determines that an evaluation is not necessary, then it would have to notify the parent in writing of the decision not to evaluate and the reasons of how they came to that decision. So what are the reasons that led them to determine an evaluation wasn't warranted at this time? So then if your child is found eligible for an evaluation, you would talk about what areas a child would need evaluated in. And then a team of qualified professionals would review the results of the evaluation and determine if the student is eligible for special education services. So if a child is not eligible, once the evaluation is done, you have the meeting and you're discussing eligibility. If the data doesn't show that the child meets the criteria to be eligible for special education services, then the process stops. If you're not in agreement, you would have other avenues you could pursue, but an IEP would not be written at that time. So as a parent, if you disagree with those evaluation results, then you could ask for something called an independent educational evaluation. And then in that situation, someone who does not work for the school district completes that independent educational evaluation, and that would be at school cost. If the school district does not agree to your request for an IEE or independent education evaluation, then the school district would have to file for due process, so a hearing officer could determine whether that should be provided or not. In the parents guide that I gave you earlier in this presentation, there is on page 18 an overview of kind of the step-by-step process, you know, showing what happens after a request is made for an evaluation and that the school district has 14 school days to respond. So that's kind of a nice overview that I like to look at and give families often, but I just wanted to put that in there to show that to you. So, you know, that's something that you can refer to in the parents guide to help you understand the evaluation process and what that timeline looks like. So in order to be eligible for special education and related services, the child must have a disability that impacts educational performance. So everybody with a disability isn't necessarily, you know, eligible for an IEP or special education and related services. And then the above, or on this slide, you'll find the 14 different eligibility categories, and these again are listed in the parents guide. And I think there are 14 here. School districts may develop criteria for each category. So after determining that a student has a disability, the evaluation team also determines if the disability adversely affects educational performance and if specialized instruction is required to address the child's deficit areas. So only when the team has identified the disability, the adverse effect, and the need for specialized instruction will the child be found eligible for special education. And then if you do want to look at these more in depth, like I said, they are listed in the parents guide and they give definitions of each eligibility category, which can be nice to read through. So once it's determined that a student meets the criteria to receive special education and related services, then an individualized education program or an IEP will be developed for that specific student. So an IEP is a written statement of the educational program that's designed to meet that student's individual needs. And it's developed by a team. So there can be multiple people on that team. Parents are an equal member of the team. You know, a lot of different people can be on that team. I know when my daughter, she had multiple services in school, so, you know, we had adaptive PE staff that were part of that team, speech therapists when she was younger, occupational, vision, physical therapists that were all part of that team, sometimes a social worker, one-on-one aid. Different people were always part of those meetings and gave input to what they saw and what progress they were seeing her make. So, you know, it's a whole team who writes that IEP, and parents again have a lot of information to share. The IEP should include a detailed description of what will be done to give the student the extra help that they need. And then the IEP can change based on the student's needs. I mean, the IEP is really like a roadmap, and it's showing where the student is at the time it's written and where they're going, where you want them to go. So it should be very detailed and specific to the student it's being written for. I kind of covered already a little bit about who's on the IEP team, but again, it's a parent, the student is appropriate. Parents and guardians are required participants. A student may attend and participate if the parent decides that he or she should be present. And then a student who's reached 14 and a half, that's the age of transition in Illinois, they have to be invited to the IEP team meetings. when transition is discussed, because you're talking about their life. My daughter started attending her meetings younger than 14 and a half, but she definitely attended every meeting after she turned 14 and a half. You know, and it was important for her to have more of a voice in her meetings. A general education teacher should be there. A special education teacher should be there. And then you have to have a local education agency or LEA. This person must know about the general curriculum and be able to ensure that the IEP is implemented, and they have authority to commit to resources. So you have to have somebody, an LEA, like a principal or superintendent or somebody at that meeting. Any evaluation personnel, so when evaluation information will be discussed at the IEP meeting, then there has to be somebody present who can explain evaluation and or test results. And then any others who have knowledge or expertise, special expertise about the student, can be invited. So parents or school could bring in other people to the IEP team meetings, such as community service providers, advocates. Sometimes families bring lawyers, you know, even a friend for support. So oftentimes, you know, I brought in other people, like maybe a friend, just to help hear things, and just to provide support for me. There are a lot of different timelines that are important to remember in the IEP process. So one is, I think I mentioned it earlier, but the 60 school days. So both the eligibility and IEP meeting must occur within 60 school days following the date of parent or guardian consent. So once you sign consent, that starts the 60 school day timeline, and then eligibility has to be determined within that timeline, and if they're eligible, then an IEP written. The meetings may occur separately as long as they're both completed within that 60 school day timeline, and then a parent must receive a 10-day prior written notice of an IEP meeting. And then one thing that has changed in the last year, maybe couple years, is that at least 3 days before either an eligibility or an IEP meeting, parents must be given copies of all of the written materials that will be reviewed at either meeting by mail, in person, or in another available method. So this would include evaluation results, collected data, all IEP documents, etc. So any written material that would be gone over in that meeting, a parent should get copies of at least 3 days in advance. So, and I think since it says at least 3 days, if for some reason you feel like you need more time, you could probably ask for that, but schools do have to at least give that information at least 3 days in advance. Parents can request to review logs regarding delivery of services and minutes of related services provided to their child at any time. So that's something to keep in mind. And I will definitely not read through all of this, but I did cite the school code where it does note, I guess that was in July of 2020, that was implemented, that those materials should be given to parents 3 school days prior to a meeting. So you can refer to that or look up that school code if you'd like. Other things to remember as far as timelines go, the IEP must be reviewed at least once a year. So, you know, if you write an IEP on September 1st of 2020, then it would need to be reviewed again by September 1st, 2021. So, you know, you don't want to let that expire. The IEP, like we said, has to be reviewed at least annually, but if there are other concerns that come up, an IEP meeting can be convened at any time to discuss changes or revisions. So as a parent, if you have concerns, you know, don't hesitate to reach out and say, hey, I think we need to meet. These are my concerns. I think we need an IEP meeting. As a professional, like a teacher or school staff, if you have concerns and think, hey, we need to have an IEP meeting, sit down with parents and student and discuss these things, then definitely, you know, multiple different people can request an IEP meeting. It doesn't just have to be parents or just professionals. And then parents must be informed of their child's progress on IEP goals at least as often as parents of non-disabled children. So I think most times in the IEP you see that if the general education population get progress reports quarterly, then oftentimes that's what you see, that progress reports will be sent home quarterly like they are for all other students, but you can expect that to see, you know, what kind of progress are they making on their IEP goals, and that, you know, gives you the chance to kind of monitor that. I do believe if you feel like progress should be monitored more often, you can ask for that more often, and it can be written in that more frequent progress monitoring would be provided. So the IEP includes a lot of different factors, present levels of academic achievement and performance, annual goals, measurements of progress and how progress is going to be shared with families, what special education and related services will be provided, how the child is going to access the general education curriculum, languages or modes of communication in which special education and related services are going to be provided, if other than English or in addition to English, what accommodations, modifications, and supports will be provided, assessment information, you know, which assessments will they take, will they have any accommodations, you know, any type of assistive technology that they'll be using, if there's any training for student or staff, special training or support that the student, the parent, or the school staff may need to ensure the child or student is provided a free, appropriate public education. You know, extended school year should be documented, whether the student will receive extended school year services or not. If so, what type of services will they receive? And then I think extended school year has to be discussed once a year, at least annually, to determine whether, you know, that's going to be a service that that student will receive. And then beginning at 14.5, like we said, appropriate transition services, including post-secondary services and supports. And then the placement, of course, is listed in the IEP where that student will be receiving services. So I wanted to go into present levels a little farther. Present levels of performance, they can be academic and functional. They're going to describe how a student is doing in different areas and how the student uses what he or she has learned through the day. This part of the IEP should describe how the student's disability affects his or her participation in the general education curriculum, and then how that student performs in academic and non-academic settings. So it's really giving you an idea of where are they at right now, what are their strengths, what are they doing well with, what are their difficulties, and just really gives you a picture of where they are at this moment in time. When you look at the present levels, that's going to help you write your annual goals. So looking at where a student is right now, what their present level of functional and academic skills are, you know, you can look at where do they struggle in the areas that they're struggling in. You can write annual goals for. So annual goals are going to be statements that identify what knowledge, skills, and or behaviors the student can acquire within a school year. And then data should form the basis for instruction, and the goals should be written to allow access to the general education curriculum and other activities during or after school. And the goals must be measurable and identify who will be responsible for working on them, and identify how the progress will be reported to parents. And annual goals list the skill or the behavior that the child will work on during that school year. So goals are kind of like big steps. So, what do you want the child, what's that student going to accomplish in a year's time? So for an example, Susie is 6, but evaluation information shows that she knows the names of only a few objects. So an annual goal, you're using evaluation information, and based on that, an annual goal that would be written for Susie could be that Susie will correctly name 60 new objects. So by looking at that goal exactly what you're hoping for her to accomplish in a year's time. You want her to be able to name 60 new objects. And then some children will also have objectives as part of their IEP. So objectives or benchmarks are going to be smaller steps. So you're breaking down that big goal into smaller steps. What are they going to meet first to get one step closer to meeting that bigger goal? So benchmarks and short-term objectives are steps toward meeting the annual goals. A short-term objective is something that's going to be able to be attained within a reporting or maybe a grading period. So let's look at an example. So for example, Susie has that goal of naming 60 new objects. So the goal may be broken down into several different objectives. So the first objective could be by December 31st, Susie will name 20 new objects in her environment. And then by March 15th, Susie will name 20 additional new objects in her environment. So she's working her way up to being able to name 40. And then by June 15th, Susie will name 20 additional. So, we're showing how she can go meet that 60 new objects goal when we're breaking it down into steps, because you want to have some type of guideline to show what you expect her to know. And these are pretty specific objectives. They give you dates and how many objects she's going to be able to name by that point. So, and if at some point a teacher or as a parent you see like they're not making the progress we thought they would, you can always revisit that IEP and that goal and see, is there something we need to be doing differently? Or should we revise this goal? Is it too hard? Do we need to rethink how many new objects we want her to learn? But when Susie meets all of these steps, she's also reaching and meeting that annual goal. Accommodations and modifications are also listed in the IEP, and I think it's important to understand the difference of the two. So an accommodation is going to allow a student to complete the same assignment as other students, but it permits a change in timing, formatting, setting, scheduling, and response or presentation. An accommodation does not alter what the test or assignment measures. A modification adjusts the expectations for an assignment or a test. It permits a change in what a test or assignment measures. So there is a difference in accommodations and modifications. So it is important to know the difference and think about, does the student truly need modifications? Do they just need accommodations, or maybe a combination of both? I know when my daughter had an IEP, she had accommodations and modifications. Progress toward goals are also, like we said, going to be implemented in the IEP. So again, parents must be informed of their child's progress on IEP goals at least as often as parents of non-disabled peers. So the IEPs should include information about how the school measure the student's progress and when reports to the parents will be issued. The measurement should be clear enough so that parents can understand whether their child's being successful or not. And then the information may be in another part of the IEP or written directly into the goal statement. So, you really want to be familiar with your child or your student's IEP to know where to locate that information. And then the IEP should include a statement of how the school will let a parent know how their child is doing in school. So again, that information on progress is going to be shared with parents of children, or shared at least as often as it would be with parents of children who do not have disabilities. And progress reports would describe the progress toward each of the child's goals. So you can review that information carefully when you get it and really look at their goals and what progress they're making. You know, and when teachers and staff are reporting on a child's progress, then they can really look at that carefully as well to see, how is this child doing? Do we need to revisit these goals or have a conversation? Because at any time, if any person on the IEP team feels like, hey, there's not enough progress being made, it's always okay to sit down and revisit things and just kind of regroup. This slide, I apologize, is not in your presentation. I added it in, but I felt like it was important to talk about related services. Again, I did cite the federal regulation. You can look that up if you want the definition of related services. But related services is a term that's used to describe services a child or student with disability needs in order to benefit from special education. Related services are going to help students with disabilities benefit from their special education by providing extra help and support in its specific areas of need. So there are multiple different types of related services that a student can be eligible for. I mean, they're probably not going to be eligible for all of them, but they can be eligible for one or maybe multiple. So again, these are all examples of related services listed on this slide. Keep in mind, this is not an all-inclusive list of available related services. This is a general list. And then if a service is necessary for a child or student to benefit from their education or special education program, then, you know, that service must be provided even if it's not included on this list. So if it's something the IEP team agrees to and it's written in, then it could be something other than you find here. Related services are also going to include services such as school health services, school nurse services, social work services in school, and even possibly parent counseling and training as needed. So qualified professionals may provide related services in areas of their expertise. Paraprofessionals and assistants who are trained and supervised in accordance with state law or policy may also sometimes assist in providing related services. And then one section of the IEP that I often talk to parents about is there is a place in the IEP more toward the back that talks about special training or supports for school personnel. Special training or support that the student, parent, or school staff need in order to ensure the students provided a free, appropriate public education can be written into the IEP. And so we did utilize this section of the IEP. We did some different medical training for staff that was written into the IEP for my daughter, just to make sure that her medical needs were understood. I know at times I had it written in that I would meet with staff and train them on her medical conditions and what she needed. And also, I think it was written in the school nurse would provide appropriate training to them as needed. So, you know, you can write different things in. I think as we got older, there was training for more like how to support her in an inclusive education environment, and maybe how to think outside the box and accommodate and modify work so that she could access the same materials. So, you know, there's different things that can be written into the IEP. The IEP, I wanted to talk about least restrictive environment. So according to federal regulations, to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are non-disabled. So that's written in that your students have the right to be educated in the least restrictive environment. And so you really have to look at what's least restrictive to that student. The decision about where the student should receive services is called their educational placement. And then the IEP team, which includes parents, decides the educational placement and services that student will receive. Decisions on placement are going to be made at least once a year. when you have your annual IEP meeting, unless something comes up, some type of concern beforehand. There could be, you know, talk about placement prior to the annual meeting. Those decisions are going to be based on that student's individual needs, but like we said, IDEA, the Individuals Disabilities Education Act, presumes that first placement option considered for each child with a disability is the general education setting or classroom in the school that the child would attend if he or she did not have a disability. So the team must also consider what extra supports the student needs that will allow that child to be successful in their educational placement. So you really want to start with least restrictive and look, can they be successful in a general education classroom in the school they would attend if they did not have a disability? And you know, if not, then you keep going down that continuum. This is found in the Parents Guide from the State Board of Education on page 60, and this is showing the least restrictive environment or placement continuum. So at the top, it does show, like, you start talking about, would they be successful in a general education setting with no supplementary aids or services? No, okay, let's move on. Would they be successful in the general education setting with supplementary aids and services? And if not, you keep going down that continuum to determine where would that student be most successful. So that's another good graphic in the Parents Guide. Okay, so it's important to remember that IEP goals should be written before a decision is made on placement. Placement should be the last thing that you discuss. You want to look at all aspects of what that child needs before you talk about placement. So you make sure you have a really clear picture of what their individual needs are. And then the team can go into a conversation about where their needs going to be most appropriately met. Goals should be written to support the student's needs, and then they should not be written to reflect the services available in a specific placement. One thing that I give information out a lot on is prior written notice. So sometimes a parent may make a request for something, and if the school and the parent aren't in agreement, or if the school says, no, we're not in agreement with that request, as a parent, you do have a right to prior written notice, which is basically a denial in writing. I did cite, again, the federal regulation at the top, so if you want to look that up, you can. But there are certain times when the school must put in writing its decisions about the child's education and state reasons for those decisions. So if you're asking for a certain placement or certain services to be put in place and the school is saying no, then, you know, the school can provide you, or you can request prior written notice to where the school's saying what they're denying, why they're denying it, what data they're using to base that decision off of. So that may come up when, you know, you may ask for an evaluation of your child, and the school doesn't feel it's warranted, then you could expect prior written notice or request prior written notice. If you're looking to change a student's disability or eligibility category, or change educational placement, or change the way in which a child's provided a free appropriate public education, you know, if there's not an agreement there, you do have the right to prior written notice. And we do have some resources on this, so if you want more information about prior written notice, definitely reach out to us. This is a handout. I don't know if I made this one of the handouts that you could download or not, but I wanted to give you an overview. This is kind of everything that we summarized today, just kind of understanding the special education process. So I thought that might be a good resource for you. And then I do want to leave time for questions. Before I jump into questions, I did want to say there are 2 parent training and information centers in Illinois. So FRCD, or the Family Resource Center on Disabilities, is located in the Chicago area. I provided their contact information in case anyone listening does reside in one of their areas. All the counties they cover are listed on the bottom of the slide. So you do have that information in your PowerPoint. And then again, Family Matters covers 94 Illinois counties outside of the Chicago area. You have all of our information listed in your presentation materials. So again, if you have questions about today's presentation or just moving forward, if you ever have questions, you can reach out. But I do want to stop and leave time for any questions that anyone may have.
We do have a question. Someone says, my son spends his entire day in the special education room. I feel like the general education teacher doesn't even know him. Why is it important she is there at the IEP meeting?
The general education teacher has to be at a meeting. They can speak to general education curriculum and things like that. So sometimes, you know, even if a student is in a special education classroom, they could still be accessing general education curriculum. So I think a lot of times a general education teacher is there to speak to what services are available, but in the parents guide it does spell out that a general education teacher should be part of that IEP meeting. So when I look at the parents guide, it says the IEP team must include a general education teacher who has knowledge of the curriculum and the provided interventions and may be responsible for implementing the IEP if the child is or may be participating in the general education environment. So that is one of the required people at the IEP meeting.
Do services need to be provided during the summer too, or only during the school year?
Extended school year services can be written into the IEP to provide services over the summer. So you should have that conversation yearly. The IEP is written for a school year. Well, it's written for a year, but it's written for, you know, that school year. So if a student does need services over the summer, you can have a conversation about extended school year and whether there's enough data to prove that they would need services over the summer. And then it would be a team decision to determine, you know, what kind of services are they going to need and what would be the frequency and duration of those services. Would they get those for a few weeks over the summer or, you know, an entire summer? How many days a week would that be? That would all be up to the IEP team. We do have different handouts on extended school year. So if you wanted more information on that, you could contact our office. We could discuss that further or get those resources to you.
Who determines ESY?
It would be the IEP team. So as a parent, if you have concerns and you feel like your child may need services over the summer because you feel like they, you know, are going to regress more, or I'm trying to think of what all of the extended school year factors are, but if a child is going to regress over summer or even I think winter break or over a period of time off of school, those services can be provided if a child's found eligible, but it is an IEP team decision, but anybody could bring forth those concerns, whether it be an IEP team member like on the school side or a parent, and you could have that conversation like, let's look at what data do we have? Do we need to start collecting more data to show that whether they need extended school year or not?
Is IEP information only for the public school system, or does private education have to provide services for disabilities as well?
So if a student is placed privately, I believe they would have, if they're found eligible, okay, so if a student's placed privately and there are concerns, then an evaluation, a parent can still request an evaluation, or a professional could too, through the public school district. The public school district's still responsible for child find. So then if a school district completes an evaluation, they could tell a family like, this is what, if they came to public school, this is what maybe they would be eligible for through an IEP. Typically though, if they're placed at a private school, they might get what's called, I think, an ISP, which is an individualized service plan. And then there is information about proportionate share. I mean, typically a student placed in a private school will not get the same amount of services in that private school setting as they would in a public school, but sometimes they can get some proportionate share services through the public school.
IEP versus 504, what's the difference?
My understanding would be a 504 oftentimes is more like accommodations. IEP is more that you need that specially designed instruction and maybe, you know, other more involved services, whereas a lot of 504s that I see are more like accommodations and things like that. Or maybe just a child has a certain medical need and needs a certain accommodations due to that medical need. Or, you know, sometimes if a child just needs preferential seating and things like that, they don't really need necessarily an IEP or wouldn't be eligible for that. But with an IEP, you're looking at, you know, does that child need specialized instruction or specially designed instruction? And we do have some handouts that kind of spell out the difference between IEPs and 504s, and those could be helpful too if you want to reach out to our office.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for giving us a wealth of information today. And thank you to all the participants for joining us today. You will be asked to complete a brief survey after exiting this webinar. Please assist us in better serving you in the future by completing those few questions. Look for details of upcoming webinars and trainings on our website, and contact our office for any individual assistance you might need related to your child's educational issues. Have a great rest of your day.